Hello to all the primary schools in Ireland, and thanks for joining Green Schools for our 5th National Climate Action Week. This special video is being brought to you live from Green Schools HQ in Dublin. My name is Grania and I'm a Climate Action Officer, and I have a really exciting programme for you today. First up, let us know in the chat box now what county you're tuning in from. I wonder if we can get all of the counties in Ireland today. Now, I'm delighted to present best-selling and award-winning writer and illustrator Oisín McGann. Oisín was the Irish writer-in-residence for Weather Stations, an EU-funded project where writers from 5 different countries were tasked with finding ways to use storytelling to raise awareness of climate change. I really hope you enjoy his dramatic and funny explanations of temperature, atmosphere, carbon, climate, and the delicate balance that is the greenhouse effect. Oisín, thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone out there has a question for Oisín or myself, type it in the Q&A box now or at any stage throughout the talk. Okay, Oisín, please take it away.
Hi, I'm Ashton McGhan. I'm a writer and illustrator. I've done a lot of different types of books. Here are some of them here. And I do a lot of talks, promotional sessions in libraries and in schools and in festivals where I talk about how I got started. And I started writing very young. I was about 6 or 7. But my stories are very simple. I didn't know much about writing when I was 6 or 7, and I wasn't very good. It took me a long time to write anything. My stories tend to be quite short, and they were pretty violent as well. I was a difficult boy. So I liked things about disasters and explosions and fighting, and volcanoes and earthquakes and that kind of stuff. Asteroids and all that kind of disaster stuff. So a typical story I'd have written when I was that age would go something like this. Once upon a time, I went to school and there was an elephant in the yard and a dinosaur came along and ate the elephant and I fought the dinosaur and I won. The end. So, not a lot of character or plot worked in there. But that's how I started off. And I liked big drama. I liked kind of, like I said, I liked really bad things happening in stories. As I got older, I kind of got better at writing, obviously, but I was still kind of writing about the same kind of stuff. And when I got into my teenage years, I was getting into horror. And horror is really important when you're a teen, because when you're starting to kind of express your independence, but you're also starting to kind of learn about some of the kind of darker stuff in life. And horror helps us deal with that. It helps us kind of get our heads around some of the dangers and some of the bad things that can happen in life. It's kind of a practice run for some of the other stuff that might happen in your life, when you're dealing with major problems. And some horror is kind of very fantasy, it's made to be entertainment. So a typical horror scene might be somebody running down a corridor with an axe murderer chasing after them, and they're trying every door in the corridor, like one after another, and they're all locked, and the axe murderer is coming after them, and they seem to be taking a long time to run down this corridor, but they're getting there, and the person's still trying the doors. They're still running, barely staying ahead, still managing to stay away from this axe murderer in a corridor. But they reach the end of the corridor and they find the last door and they throw it open. It's unlocked, but it's a wardrobe. And the axe murderer comes up behind them and chops their head off and there's blood everywhere. And that's fine. That's grand. You get that a lot in horrors. But it's not something we can relate to. We can't really say, oh, I know what that's like. I had my head chopped off yesterday. It was terrible. I hate when that happens. So a lot of horror can be about stuff that we know, we feel safe from, we know it's not going to happen. But also some of the stuff can be about, some little horror stories can be about stuff that we can relate to. And being able to relate to something in a story is really important for storytelling. Making somebody feel that this could happen to them, or that they, something that they can relate to, something that they can say, oh, I know how that feels, or that's happened to me, or I know, I've had an experience like that. That's a really powerful thing in storytelling. So Picture a different scene. So there was a friend of mine years ago, and he was working on his car out in the garden, and working on the car door, and the wind caught the door and it slammed the door shut on his finger, right? And it took the top of his finger off. So there was only a little bone sticking out the top. And I tell that story, and I get more of a reaction to that than I do to kind of people, listening to having somebody having their head chopped off, because it's something we can relate to. It's something that we can say, oh, I know how that might feel, because we've all kind of damaged the tips of our fingers, whether you've hit your thumb with a hammer or caught in a door or something. We know how that might feel. When I first started hearing about climate change back in the 80s and 90s, I could understand it, but I didn't really get it. I couldn't really relate to it. It tended to be about things that were big and far away, and stuff that really didn't seem to have much to do with me. So it was about the atmosphere heating up, and it was about glaciers collapsing. And I've never been to a glacier. I don't know any glaciers. None of my friends are glaciers. It's not something really I can relate to. And you hear about things like, the temperature changing by 1 or 2 degrees, which doesn't seem like a big deal, So it's easy to feel completely disconnected from it. But we're not really. If you think about the atmosphere of the place you're in, if you think about the air that's pressing in against your skin, you're inhaling it, you're taking this air into your lungs. That's the environment pressing against your skin. That's the environment you're inhaling into your lungs. You need it to be a certain weight, you need to be certain pressure and temperature. And we are so good at adapting to our environment, we forget sometimes how vulnerable we are to changes in it. So this is a thermometer. I'm sure you've seen one before. There are a lot of different types of thermometer, including one you stick up your bum, which apparently is the most accurate. Who knew? But this is the one we have at home, and it's the kind you stick in your ear. So our temperature is supposed to stay at about 37 degrees Celsius. Not all of our body all the time, but all the important bits, kind of our internal temperature, the stuff that keeps all our internal organs running, that has to stay at about 37 degrees. And we can't really take a change of more than 3 or 4 degrees either way. So a small bit if you can, if you had freezing fingers, they might be kind of well below 37 degrees. But that'd be okay. You could survive it. It's not a big deal. Or if you burnt your mouth, you kind of parts of your mouth might kind of heat up past 37 degrees. But again, it's only a small part of you. But for most of our bodies, our internal temperature, the main part of our body, has to stay around 37 degrees. If it drops to 34 degrees Celsius, you have hypothermia. And if it goes up to 40 degrees Celsius, you have hyperthermia. And both of these conditions are life-threatening. You could be in trouble. So if your parents have ever taken your temperature, they'll have reacted to the number on that thermometer. Chances are you're okay. But if your internal temperature was 2 or 3 degrees or 4 degrees above what it's supposed to be or below, then you might need medical help. So that's how dependent we are on air temperature, because the air temperature is a big part of what our body temperature is. We are really vulnerable to changes in temperature, but because we're so good at adapting our environment to our needs, we don't think about it too much too often. The other thing we need is our air to be a certain pressure. So standing kind of at normal height above sea level, where most of us live, we have about 8 kilometers of breathable air. So the air has a certain weight. We are sitting under maybe hundreds of kilometers of air, which weighs down, creates pressure, and that pressure is enough. It makes it the right pressure for us to breathe. So if we were to go higher up, say above 8 kilometers, say you're climbing a mountain, well, the mountain climbers refer to the kind of, the air above 8 kilometers as the death zone. And they are not kidding, because that's the point where you can't breathe without oxygen tanks. You can't last for very long because the air is too thin, and there's not enough air to breathe. So again, The atmosphere is really important to us, but because it doesn't change very often, we do take that for granted. But you know, if you climb a mountain too high, or if you're up in a plane, you need air to be supplied to you. You can't survive up there on your own without some kind of additional air, oxygen. So this is our broken globe, and I just want to talk a little bit more about the atmosphere and its importance to us, but also how fragile it is. Because as I said, we do tend to take it for granted. So on this globe, it's broken. As you see, it came off its stand, but it's actually a bit more useful like that. I've marked Ireland with a little circle because it's so small, you can barely even see it. It's kind of covered up by labels. So when I was talking about the atmosphere, well, the breathable atmosphere, the bit that we can breathe, being 8 kilometers deep. To put this in perspective, if you were to look at the globe and try and figure out how thick the atmosphere was on this globe, if I said to you that the International Space Station flies at a height of between 350 and 400 kilometers, that's about so on Ireland, that's about the distance from Donegal to Cork. It's maybe just a bit shorter than the length of Ireland, 350 to 400 kilometers. So if you look at that on the globe, okay, and we try and see how high that would be above the Earth, then it would be maybe that high. So that's where the International Space Station would be, right? And it's in space. It's well above the atmosphere. Okay, or certainly well above the breathable atmosphere, and you can see that's it's hardly above the surface at all. If we were to talk about that, the breathable, the 8 kilometers, that's probably as thick as that piece of paper. You see this bit of paper that's wrapped around the globe. Okay, so that kind of really puts in perspective how thin our atmosphere is, how delicate it is. So it's easier to understand how we might be affecting it when you think of it like that. That actually it is not this kind of, this mass of air outside. It's actually a really, really thin layer around the Earth. And obviously we need to breathe, but we also need it to provide a climate that we can survive in. And this is really important, obviously very important for us. So one of its most important functions, the atmosphere, is to protect us from the sun. Now, if you look at the moon is kind of just bare rock. And the surface of the moon, when the sun is shining on it, gets really, really hot. And when the sun is not shining on it, when it's in shadow, it's really, really cold. Okay, there's extremes of temperature. If that were to happen on Earth, then what would happen if we had the sun, say, shining down on the Earth without an atmosphere? It would burn, it would cook everything that's on that part of the surface. And then the rest of the surface would be freezing. So that's no good to us. We need life. So the oceans would all boil off if they were just facing the sunlight without an atmosphere. So what we need is something that protects us from that. And the atmosphere does just that. The atmosphere, it holds on to some of that heat and it spreads it around the Earth so that the one point in the Earth isn't taking all that heat. So the heat is spread around within the atmosphere. And that's done by greenhouse gases. There are these special gases in our atmosphere that help absorb heat, hold on to it, and then the air flows around the Earth and it spreads that heat around. Okay, and this is vital, absolutely vital for us, for our survival. So without that atmosphere, the Earth would be cooking on one side and it would be freezing on the other. So it is absolutely crucial for us. Even that really, really thin layer, remember what I said, just that paper thin bit of layer of atmosphere, that's doing that really, really important job. And this is where we get our climate and our weather from, just from that soaking up of the heat and spreading it around the Earth. So this is a log, as you can see, just normal piece of wood from a tree. And this log is made from air. Well, that's not quite true, but a lot of it comes from the air. A tree is nearly 50% carbon, and plants get their carbon from the air. They get it from carbon dioxide in the air, and some of that comes from us. We breathe out carbon dioxide and plants take it in. So your breath might be helping make some big oak tree somewhere. And so think about that, nearly half the wood of the biggest tree, the biggest, oldest, gnarliest tree you can think of, came from the air. So your body is a little under 20% carbon. All living things use carbon for building themselves. Animals get their carbon from plants that they eat, or they get them from animals who eat plants. And while plants, like trees, are taking in CO2 or carbon dioxide on the land, there are microorganisms called phytoplankton, which are kind of the plants of the sea, or the basic plants of the sea. They're doing it in the sea. And they're taking in as much carbon dioxide and releasing as much oxygen as trees do on land, possibly even more. So they're absolutely vital to us, our survival. And today we depend on the dead to survive. And I mean that literally. So a long time ago, plants died and they fell and they formed layers over the ground and they mixed with other stuff on the ground. And that became our soil, which is what we use for growing all of our food. Over thousands of years, some of that soil got waterlogged and became peat. And in millions of years, they became oil and gas and coal. And as each layer piled up, it weighed down on those below it. It was crushing them down under huge pressure. And it created these massive concentrated stores of carbon. Okay, so this is carbon that was being taken out of the air and stored in the ground. So peat, oil, coal, and gas all came from dead stuff. Layers and layers of dead stuff crushed down and compressed into the ground years ago. And that's why we call them fossil fuels. So this process of giving and taking of carbon dioxide between the ground and the sea and the air, between plants and animals, that was a very delicately balanced cycle. And it took a long time for the Earth to get it right. Eventually we kind of got this Goldilocks situation of just enough, just right. The temperature was just right, just enough carbon dioxide in the air. And it was working really well. And then humans started burning stuff. How do you like your drink? When we are making a drink for ourselves, we add a flavor to it. And how that flavor works depends on the concentration of it in the water. We normally add a flavor to water. So if, for instance, you like tea or coffee or orange squash, any kind of soft drink, then what you do is you add a flavor to a water to give it a good taste. And the balance, the amount of flavor in that is really important. So if it's not enough, if it's too weak and insipid, it won't taste very good. If it's too strong, then it will taste overwhelming and might even be disgusting because it's much too strong. So our atmosphere works the same way. We have certain gases in our atmosphere like carbon dioxide and methane, nitrous oxide, and these are greenhouse gases, and we need the right mix of them in our atmosphere. Because remember when I was talking about the globe, that thin atmosphere that holds that heat in and spreads it around, it keeps the temperature just right. Okay, so we need those gases to be at just the right balance. And the Earth kind of, it went up and down a lot over its lifetime. So if there weren't enough greenhouse gases, then you could have at the very extreme, you could have what was called a snowball Earth. And that meant that almost the entire surface of the Earth was covered by glaciers. It was completely frozen. If there were too many greenhouse gases, you had what was called hothouse Earth. And that meant that the temperatures were really high, very extreme heat, really bad weather, strong storms, because there's loads of energy out in the atmosphere from that heat. So those are kind of two extremes. So the greenhouse gases that control the heat in our atmosphere, they have to be the right balance. And what we've been doing over the last couple of centuries in particular is we have been adding a bit to those gases steadily over time. So if you imagine, I'm going to make a cup of coffee here. Imagine this is a coffee cup. And say you wanted to make your coffee So we're going to add in, say, a spoon. Okay. Now, that might be a little bit weak, so maybe we could add in a bit more. Okay. And say that would get the taste just right. You know, probably just a little too appetizing. It's cold water, so so let's say our atmosphere at its normal. Now, obviously, our atmosphere isn't brown, but you can imagine. Okay, but now what we've been doing is we've been slowly adding a bit more over time, gradually, because there is an awful lot of carbon dioxide and other gases in that atmosphere already. We've only been adding a bit, but we've been adding it steadily. And the more advanced we get, the more fuel we burn, the more electricity we need, the more things we burn on our planet, the more we've been adding carbon dioxide in particular, but also other gases to our atmosphere. And now we got to the point where we're tipping the balance. It is no longer as balanced as it should be. We now have an atmosphere that is now full of the wrong stuff, okay? And we are still adding to it. And the atmosphere, our climate, is in a way, it's like our bodies. The overall climate has a certain temperature, and it has to stay pretty stable. And in the same way that our bodies can get hypothermia or hyperthermia by just changing it by 2 or 3 degrees, then even a small change in our climate can cause a big change in the character of the Earth. And I should describe the difference between climate and weather. So if you imagine, you know, maybe you act the Aegis sometimes, but you're not normally in Aegis, you're not in Aegis all the time. That's the difference between your behavior and your character. You might act a certain way, you know, one day, but that's only one day. That's your behavior. Whereas who you are as a person, your personality, your values, they are your character, okay? And for the Earth, the climate is the character. The climate is the overall character of its weather, whereas the weather itself is behavior. The weather is what happens from day to day. And we have changed the character of the Earth. We have changed the climate. And that means that we are having an effect on the weather that we didn't have before. And the weather is now doing things that it didn't do before because we have changed that delicate balance of gases in our atmosphere. So what do we do? In stories, we often look for big dramatic solutions. We like action and explosions and helicopters flying in and people running and jumping and falling down and dogs being rescued and that kind of stuff. Drama makes for entertaining stories. It grabs our attention. In reality, most of our important problems are actually solved by people working together in simple ways every day, whether that's in your home or in your community or your country. It's like the way you brush your teeth every day, so the dentist doesn't have to pull them all out later in a much more dramatic scene. Do something simple now to stop things getting worse later. And it's not always very interesting or exciting. You don't have to jump out of a helicopter or go fight a shark. But stuff works when we all work together, when a bunch of us gather and work towards a single goal. So for a start, we need as much of this as possible. I don't just mean logs, but all kinds of plant life. We need to stop burning it, and we need to let as much plant life grow as possible. Plants, fungi, and soil all work together to soak up and store carbon dioxide. We need to burn less and grow more, and nature will help us. If we give it space, it will take it. It will grow as much as we let it. So all we have to do is just step back and give it space. And by burning less, I mean doing less of everything that uses fossil fuel products. They're used to generate electricity, they're used in farming and manufacturing food. And in Ireland, farming is a major part of our economy and our greenhouse gas emissions because our livestock produce a lot of greenhouse gases. Fossil fuels are used to heat our homes, they fuel our vehicles, and they power the factories that make all our stuff. So on one hand, humans are doing this damage, but it also means that we have a lot of control over what's happening. This isn't an asteroid coming at us. This isn't some super volcano about to erupt. This is us, and because we are causing it, we have the ability to control it. It gives us power. Every object you use in your life connects you to the earth. Everything we make comes from materials taken from the ground, and these are limited resources, so we need to be wiser about how we use them. So everything you do matters. Any change you can make to use less and waste less will help, because every part of your life is connected to the earth, whether it's your phone, your table, the walls of your house, the clothes you're wearing. All of these things came from the earth. All of those things connect you back to it. It's not like nature and humans are separated. We are nature. We are part of it. You can't do everything, but everybody can do something. And you will be part of the greatest movement that's ever been. Millions and millions of people are already involved. And for the first time, we are working together as a species for the good of our world. And that's an amazing thing to be part of. So if you'd like to find out more about this stuff, you can read my book. But apart from that, just be curious. Find part of all this that you're particularly interested in. Follow your passions. What would you do anyway? What would you do because you're into it? Figure out how you'd like to get involved. There are as many solutions as there are problems. I'm Oisín McGann. Thanks very much for watching.
Oisín, thank you so much for that. I hope you all really enjoyed it. Okay, we have a little quiz. So taking the temperature, how many kilometers of breathable air do we have in Earth's atmosphere? Is it loads, 8 kilometers, 80 kilometers, or 800 kilometers? 8. Very good to anyone who remembered that. A thin layer of life. Why do we need our atmosphere? Does it protect us from the sun or protect us from aliens? The sun, of course. It helps to regulate the temperature. As Oisín said, it ensures that one side of Earth that's facing the sun isn't boiling off all our water, and the other side isn't freezing and turning into an ice age. Making wood from air. What percentage of trees are made of carbon? Can you remember? Trees are so important for taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and producing oxygen for us to breathe. It's 50%. Good job if you got that. And what percentage of your own body is made up of carbon? Are we denser than trees? I don't think so. 20%? Great. Now, can you name 4 different fossil fuels? So, it's a tough one. Think about things we burn for energy. Coal, oil, peat or turf, and gas. Well done if you got all 4 of them. Very impressive. Not too hot, not too cold. Living in Goldilocks' zone. Can you name 3 different greenhouse gases? So this is a very difficult one. There are loads of greenhouse gases, but Oisín mentioned 3, so we'll stick to those for today. Carbon dioxide. Who got that? Well done. Otherwise known as CO2. Methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, N2O. Carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels and our car exhaust, methane from cows belching and some other sources, and nitrous oxide also from exhaust, especially diesel cars. Everything you do matters, okay? Oisín said that, and I really want to reaffirm it. And what we're going to ask you to do for Climate Action Week is to take a climate pledge. It should be something new that you don't already do. And we're going to ask you or your teacher or a guardian or parent to post a photo of the pledge on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You don't have to be in the photo yourself if you don't want to be. Just the pledge will be great. And tag Green Schools IRE and use the hashtag Climate Action Week. We have €500 in prizes to give away. So yeah, take a new climate pledge, please. And here's some ideas. So plant some native trees, have a zero waste lunch, walk, cycle, or scoot to school. Hands up if you do that already. Amazing. Have a no power hour and grow your own food. That is just so much fun. I love growing my own food. Take a shallow bath. Learn about climate change. Tick. Use your voice. Use public transport or carpool if you can't walk, cycle, or scoot to school. And host a swap shop. And that doesn't have to be clothes. It could be books and toys, and a great thing to do between Halloween and Christmas, especially to try and reduce the amount of new things that we're buying. So yeah, look, Oisín said it and I'll say it again, everything you do matters. So please take a climate pledge and post it on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, tag Green Schools and use the hashtag Climate Action Week. But that brings us to the end of our programme today. I want to thank you all so much for getting involved in Climate Action Week. It means so much to all of us here in Green Schools, and good luck with your next green flag. Bye.